I'm Chaplain Scott of the Oregon National Guard. This is the Hope in the Trenches podcast. Where going forward, I'll sit down for conversations with people who offer interesting and informative perspectives on finding strength for life and work in the trenches, and even improving our spiritual posture. Whether you feel like you're under heavy bombardment or ready to go over the top toward a new objective, it's good to be with you. Our guest today is Talya Davidoff, a 13 Bravo Cannoneer with Charlie Battery, 2nd of the 218th Field Artillery in Portland, Oregon. She was born and raised in South Africa and earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Marine Biology and Ecology from the University of Cape Town. Talya is a world-class athlete in the sport of freediving. Diving as in holding your breath and going as deep underwater as you can, not jumping from a platform. And Talya holds 38 national freediving records for South Africa, 34 continental records for Africa, and 3 spearfishing world records, some of which you achieved here in the Northwest. She joined the Oregon Army National Guard in 2022 and completed basic training as a Distinguished Honor Grad, highest rifle marksmanship, and highest ACFT 594. We'll talk about that later. She followed that by graduating as the Distinguished Honor Graduate for her 13 Bravo Advanced Individual Training, or AIT. On the civilian side, Talya teaches kickboxing and is a certified scuba and freediving instructor, currently ranked in the top 15 in the world for the sport of freediving. She's been chosen to represent Team USA in international competition. And along with all of those accomplishments, she's a cancer survivor too. Our co-host today is Beth Conn, also known as Major Conn to many of us. She's the Director of Psychological Health for the Oregon National Guard, and this is her second time on the podcast. She was our second ever guest back in Season 1. Go back and check out Episode 3. Beth earned her master's degree in social work from Portland State University and has over 25 years of social work and counseling experience. Beth has worked in juvenile corrections, adoption social work, teaching and counseling individuals, couples, and groups. Her passion for veterans and experience in working with PTSD led her to seek out a job within the military culture, so she started work as a contractor for the National Guard in 2013 as a full-time behavioral health officer before taking a direct commission in the Guard in 2015. In 2019, she deployed to the Horn of Africa with the Oregon Army National Guard's 1st of the 186th Infantry. Beth has been married for 28 years and they have 4 children. 2 of her daughters are in the military too. Beth enjoys being active and being outside, hiking, biking, reading, and working in her yard. And our producer, the great First Sergeant Zach Holden, a public affairs specialist for the Oregon Guard and the 115th Mobile Public Affairs Detachment out of Salem. Talya and Beth, thank you guys so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to the conversation. And we were chatting about this a little bit before we started recording. Everybody has a unique journey in how we ended up in the military. Your path to the Army was even more extraordinary than most. Can you tell people how did you grow up and end up in Oregon in the Guard?
So I grew up in South Africa. I was raised in a village, for lack of a better term, very far away from the coast, and lived a typical farm child's life. However, thanks to Sir David Attenborough, fell in love with the ocean.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely fell in love with the ocean. So when I went to go study after high school, I said, I want to study marine biology. And my parents said, we're going to put you on a gap year. And I did a gap year in Israel. With a lot of a very structured gap year. So It wasn't just out doing things. I worked on a kibbutz. I worked with Amnesty International, and I studied in Jerusalem for a bit. After which I came back and I said, well, I still want to study marine biology. And they were like, oh, okay, fine. So I studied at the University of Cape Town, getting my Bachelor of Science there, after which I went on to be the in-house marine biologist at it's called Shark Diving Unlimited. I basically worked with great whites for 3 years. In the water, it was pretty hectic at times. But after that, I realized that I wanted to travel. I wanted to get out there and, challenge myself in terms of culture, because if you stay in one country, Israel had already shown me that cultures are so completely different, and I wanted to go and work somewhere else. So from that point onwards, I sort of hopped around the world. I worked in the Maldives, I worked in Thailand, and then found myself in the Cayman Islands. From the Cayman Islands, I was there until Jan 2019. My father passed away mid-Jan 2019, and at the time, I was not able to go home. So it was a very, very tough experience. And it was something my dad and I had agreed on. You know, I'd asked him, I said, Dad, what happens if you die? And he said, well, don't come back. I'm not going to know about it. But in hindsight, you know, a funeral is for the living, not for the dead. So there was a lot pent up there. I was dating an American at the time. So I moved to the US just to, you know, regroup, basically.
Sure.
So, and then, yes, to end an awful story of a very awful marriage, I was left with the decision of leaving the US or joining the National Guard. And I decided that was my best option and that I had already built enough in the US and I love the US. So I wanted to stay. So I joined the National Guard, and honestly, I did not think I would enjoy it. I mean, I was 32 at the time. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to be this old person, you know, who struggles, can't keep up, can't do all of these things. And then I went to basic training and I just loved it.
Oh, good. What did you know about the National Guard before you joined?
Not very much, to be honest. I mean, I went, you know, you do what I assume people do is you kind of go to that building where all the officers are and you go and talk a bit to everyone. And I mean, the Marine Corps was very funny in their questioning. You know, they were like, can you do pull-ups? And I was like, yes. And they were like, you're in. And I'm like, okay, that's not, that's not really my vibe. So I ended up going to the National Guard recruiter, and she gave me a very, very clear rundown on how things work and what the National Guard's role is, and, you know, how we present ourselves within the different branches of the military. And you know, a lot of people have this idea that the National Guard is full of people who you know, aren't necessarily up to par with the regular big army, whereas it's really not. You know, at the same time, we're juggling our civilian lives with the military life, and we are expected to be held to a standard that is equal to big army. And and we work towards that. That's not something that we, you know, kind of skirt around until you have to go to JRTC or something like that. You know, we make sure, like I was at drill last weekend, we worked our butts off. It was real.
Oh, good. Well, so you go to the storefront recruiting agencies and they all give you your pitch. When did you say, sign me up to be a cannoneer, to join the artillery?
So there were a couple of raised eyebrows when it came to Cannoneer, because I scored 95 on my ASVAB. And I was like, okay, I've got so much that I need to do. I still want to dive this year. What are my options that work with an AIT that is relatively short, but it is something that I'm still going to enjoy or want to do? And we looked at the different options, and Cannoneer came up, and it was kind of said like, yeah, but you don't want to do that because it's physically very demanding. And I was like, that means I'm absolutely going to do it.
Right. That did not dissuade you.
Yeah. So I'm, you know, very competitive. And at the same time, and I know this might sound ridiculous, I have spent a very large portion of my life using my brain, having to problem solve and all of that. And so I didn't necessarily want to go in and have the responsibility of anything other than lift heavy things, pull string, make boom.
a big boom.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, those rounds are not light.
No.
The average artillery round, some of them weigh 70 to 90 pounds, right?
Yeah. I think for the high fizz test, it's 105-pound cement-filled round that you have to load 15 of those and unload 15 of those in 15 minutes.
There you go. That's a good functional fitness test, right? So, and artillery is the king of battle, and world events too. We see just how important that is, and a great artillery unit here in Oregon too. So, well, now you joined the National Guard. You went to basic training, and did you go right into AIT, or did you have a break in between?
No,
those?
I finished one day and was at AIT the next. So no break. And we were at Fort Sill, so I didn't need to leave Fort Sill. We were just there.
Yeah. But it sounds like you found that competitive spirit there at basic training in AIT as well.
It was. I mean, there was a lot of training. There were certain people, obviously, you can't expect every single person who goes through basic training to be, adept with fitness and motivated by fitness. Right. But I was also very lucky at AIT. I had spoken to the higher ups. I'd arranged a meeting with the battalion where I had my freediving gear brought in, and they allowed me to train at the pool on weekends, which was a really, really lucky thing to have happened to me. And I mean, I remember the drill sergeants were like, "Who are you?" And I was like, I'm no one. I'm just trying to train.
Yeah. Well, but from a leadership perspective, that was probably, I mean, no is always the easy button, but there was something that was, they didn't really have to do a lot to permit you to do that. But obviously that was important for you mentally and emotionally while you're going through that.
Absolutely. For me, it's so important. My training is so important to me, and I get itchy. I get uncomfortable when I don't have access to it. Mm-hmm. And there are certain periods of time, but I made the mistake of Googling Fort Sill ahead of time, and I saw there was a pool. So like this was like months in advance that I was like. And I remember speaking to my drill sergeants at basic training. And I was like, how do I set this up? How do I figure this out and navigate this so that I can get into this? And I was really lucky that, the first sergeant with our AIT was like super into fitness, really happy about it. And he sent it up to battalion. And I was alarmed to sit in that office and listen to higher ups be like, "So you freedive, vertical blue, you on that?" And I'm like, "What? You guys know?" So it was a very humbling experience, but feel very lucky to have had the leadership that I did, and that they allowed me to continue my training.
And then high marksmanship. I mean, it probably didn't hurt that you were performing well. You performed well at basic training. That if you're doing your job and doing it well, then that can often open some doors as well. And so high rifle marksmanship and high ACFT. Had you taken the new Army combat fitness test before you went to basic training?
Not officially. I mean, so one of the things that I was really nervous about going to basic training. I can be an anxious person. I don't it's a big change for me. I was really, really concerned about it. So I decided to focus on the fitness as kind of like my base point, my goal. Mm-hmm. Aside from learning everything that I could, I wanted to be the fittest that I could. So I looked up the tests ahead of time and kind of was like, okay, how far can I push myself? There I'm 24-hour fitness, throwing a ball backwards, hoping I don't hit someone.
That's the event I need to work on. Yeah.
Oh, it's all technique.
Yeah.
I learned from a group of Samoans during the holiday break, because I was at basic over Christmas with a group of Samoans. They taught me the skills for the ball throw. It's all technique.
Wow. That's a big rugby culture in Samoa too.
Yep.
And South Africa. What's your we can talk more about the ACFT before too, or later, excuse me. What any lessons that you learned going through basic training in AIT and then coming back to the Guard? Was there something that you wish you had known before you went in?
Really, so what's interesting about basic training as someone who, and I mean, I have my biggest issue as of coming out of a marriage where I was married to a narcissist. So my perception of the world was really skewed. I was convinced I was the problem for a very long time, right? And that's a really, there's, you can talk to people, you can get counseling, but it's a frame of mind that you really have to be aware of. So basic training, I was in a leadership role from day one. I didn't get the opportunity to get changed out or anything. They were like, that's the one. So 10 weeks I was in charge. Okay. And what happened during red phase of basic training was, there's a lot of group correction, but my perception is skewed. So I have this, eventually I pull a drill sergeant aside and I say to him, listen, I need to understand something. I understand group correction. I understand what is going on. But at this point, I don't know if I'm doing things right or if I just think I'm doing things right. And that is messing with my mentality quite a bit. And so he was like, no, you're doing everything fine. We just need to get everyone else up to scratch. And I'm like, okay, because I don't want to perceive things completely wrong. So learning that, in red phase, you have to do everything right. Or you have to at least strive to do everything right. But you're gonna get nailed either way, because it's not, and it is a good lesson. It is. I mean, there are people who understand that they are the problem, and then you come together and you work together as a group. That's what red phase is all about. So is that being able to work together as a group. After that, they gave us rifles, and then I was happy, because then it became more of an individual task. And for me, basic training was incredibly tough in the sense that I became a sort of, they used to call me the battery mother, because I was sorting people out constantly. At that point, I eventually made the joke where I was like, I will not respond to anyone after 8 p.m. My office hours end at 8 p.m. because it was starting to get like a really weird traumatic response to my own name being called so many times a day.
Sure.
But I think what happens, the one thing that I really, really learned from basic training is resilience, in the sense that I think it is kind of more prolific now during our times, is people are very easily offended, even if the mistake is theirs. And you have to learn that you made a mistake, someone yelled at you, it's over. The ability to bounce back is only going to benefit you. And the quicker you realize that, the more resilient you are, the quicker you bounce back, the better you're going to get the job done. So you just have to learn. And what is nice in the Army is you don't necessarily have to go through these constructive feedback where you have to like positive, negative, positive situation, which is great, but it's a time waster. So at the end of the day, you learn like that filter, when that filter's completely gone and you have to go back into society and you can't just tell people like it is, that's tough. But there's that communication becomes so incredibly clear, and that's really important. And for me, it's something that I miss in my everyday life, is someone, you made this mistake, fix it like this, continue. And so I think the learning to not be offended by getting told off for something you did wrong, or just getting told off in general because the drill sergeant is sick of you, which they had every right to be. Honestly, I watched that go down, and I felt so sorry for the drill sergeants. They are genuinely out there trying their best, and at times working with brats, for a lack of a better term.
I did see some recent research data from Adam Grant, an organizational psychologist, that the new data is that the sandwiched feedback model, not effective.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
So the Army way, the very pragmatic, just as you said, here's the standard. You didn't achieve the standard. Here's what you need to do to fix it, and then we're cool, right? Just do what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, they say the more effective way to give that feedback instead of the compliment is to give them the feedback with the message. The reason I'm giving you this feedback is because I believe in you, and I believe that you can meet the standard, and here's what the standard is.
That's good advice to go forward with.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, and trust too, right? Have you built up trust with that person whom you are correcting? Do they believe that you have their best interest in mind?
Crucial. Yeah. I had a conversation with a person who is interested in becoming a medical officer, and she asked me, what do you think is the quality that makes somebody a good National Guardsman. And one of the things that I said was, I think a sense of adventure is really important. And the more that I learn about you, Talya, the more I think you embody that characteristic and sense of adventure in all of these things that you've expressed. Where did that come from?
Oh, goodness. So I was raised in a family where my parents got divorced when I was 2. They became best friends and were the best co-parents that anyone could ever wish for. I did not see a fight between them. They, it was honestly the strangest, in hindsight, when I see other people's families and a lot of what is traditional here in America, I realized that I did not have a normal upbringing, because both my parents, they raised us very well. They had partners throughout their lives who were all very good picks. Like, in hindsight, I can't fault any of them. But they were the ones that were saying, okay, there's one thing in the house is you do good, not because, and this was an interesting thing about religion in our house, is you do good not because God tells you to. You do good because that's what you should do. You shouldn't be doing good things out of fear of a higher power. They should be natural. And, so that's one of the ways that we were raised. And aside from that, our parents were very much against the get married, have kids, do that thing. They said, travel, move elsewhere so that we have somewhere to go when we want to visit you. And all of us were encouraged to take gap years after school. We're a family of three girls. And, my eldest sister lived in Israel for 10, 12 years. She's just moved to Canada. My middle sister travels a bunch. I cannot stay in one place. And that all stems from our parents. My mother did a 2-year trip, I think it was 2 years, across Europe when she was 18. My dad traveled a bunch. My dad snuck into America in the 70s. He flew to Canada, jumped the border, did a scuba diving instructor course in America, snuck back over and flew home. So he became one of the first scuba diving instructors in South Africa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, we all have a sense of adventure, I think, and it comes from our parents.
You came by that, honestly.
Yeah.
On your website, you make a comment that I thought was very interesting. You say, water is memory. Memory is history. And if we do not know our history, how can we know ourselves? Can you tell us a little bit more about water, your relationship with water, how you see water, and how that's helped you to know yourself?
So water is multifaceted. When it comes to my relationship with water, there's so many different aspects that I connect to. One of the simplest things that makes me think a lot is the simplicity of understanding how the body works. So right here underneath the eyes, you have a set of nerves called the trigeminal nerves. And those come from a time predating when we were still water mammals. Now, what it does, we call it the mammalian dive reflex. When water touches your trigeminal nerves, your body goes into a few things. It's called a peripheral shunt, which moves your blood around your organs to stabilize them, as well as systematically lowers your heart rate. And that is a hold from evolution where animals would prepare for really, really deep dives, long dives. That is something that we still have in our bodies. And so for me, that's an evolutionary trait that we use, that we have today, and we don't use it. So one of the knee-jerk reactions when someone is suffering from anxiety, one of the things you get told is to go and splash your face with cold water And without realizing that there's actual science behind that, is that as soon as water is going to touch that area, your heart is systematically going to start slowing down.
I've never heard that
I have
before.
never heard of that in all of my mental health training.
Pretty cool science. Yeah.
Very cool.
So that for me is a very, very important thing, because it grounds me, it connects me to whatever is in the water. Then I'm not just a visitor in the ocean, I'm a part of the ocean, and I have these evolutionary traits that can help me be in the ocean. And I mean, aside from that, my fascination with water has come from a very, very young age, and I've always wanted, every path that I've gone down has always put me in the water. So it was impossible to not have that relationship. And then a part of that as well is my father was an incredible man, and he opened one of the first scuba diving shops in South Africa. Was one of the first scuba diving instructors in South Africa. They did these crazy scuba diving competitions with like blacked out masks and tasks underwater, and he headed up that. And then at university, he joined and captained the underwater hockey team. And so there was just the amount of, from the age of like 5, we were snorkeling, we were swimming, we were water skiing. My time with my father was always around water. And he always understood, it was a conversation. Of course, all parents are supportive, but my mom is just like, go team, has no idea. Initially had no idea. Right now, she's going to do her judging course for freediving, because she now knows too much and she gets annoyed with the system. So she's going to do her judging course. But, my dad always understood what I did. And when I started freediving, he was like, do you understand the risks? And, we discussed the science around it. And that's a really cool relationship to have with a parent. It puts you I'm not saying we should be on equal playing field, but it's where my dad and I were able to talk as adults.
Right.
In understanding the risks and the rewards behind what we do. So my history is evolutionary. It is my parents, and it is my personal fascination throughout life with water. And it fundamentally, like, if I ignore those things, I ignore a core part of myself. And I don't think that's healthy.
I would agree.
So are you in the water every day, or how often do you?
I try to be. No, at the moment I'm training 3 times a week. My coach is some insane dude from Croatia. He's an amazing diver, and he's also in sports science, and he does a lot of work mentally. And if it was up to him, I'd be in the water 6 days a week. But trying to manage other parts of life. But 3 times a week, and then I regularly travel to go and do depth adaptation, because I can't really do that in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, sure. And then are there breathing exercises or meditation, other things that you do to support your training?
Yes, absolutely. So lung flexibility is a big part of freediving. And now lung flexibility, that's a strange thing in itself, because if you to take the lungs out of the body, you can like stretch them over a car or a tennis court. I don't know what the statistic is. Lungs in themselves are very, very stretchy. So what the issue comes into is the flexibility of your rib cage. So that's what you need to focus on, is rib cage flexibility. And there are certain exercises that you can do, which end up being sort of meditative. And it's also what I like to use to breathe up when I'm about to do a dive. And it's the simple process. There is an overlap with yoga, but this one is a 2-second inhale, a 2-second pause, and a 10-second exhale, followed by a 2-second pause. And you put a heart rate monitor on you, and you will systematically see your heart rate drop. If I'm doing it in a pool, I think the lowest I've gotten my heart rate to is 36. Just with that type of breathing. And it's not huge. It's not it is diaphragmatic. And that's the biggest issue, is most people were kind of trained from a very young age. If you look at children belly breathe. They absolutely, they belly breathe, they're out, beer guts out, it's great. Then at some point, we start getting self-conscious about our bodies and we start pulling the stomach in and we just breathe from our chest, which is, it's energy wasting, anxiety causing. It's really, when you're breathing up here, you're pushing against so much bone that you have to work so hard to actually get that breath in. So when people understand that a diaphragmatic breath, using the diaphragm, your actual breathing muscle, that's what it's designed for, you will then increase the amount of air that you're moving. Aside from that, most of your oxygen transfusion happens in the bottom third of your lungs. So anything working down towards here is going to benefit you. So I like to spend 20 minutes a day doing diaphragmatic breathing more than anything else. And, making sure that your shoulders aren't moving. And what it does do, one of the interesting things I saw it happen for me, and it actually led me into research, is it raises your core temperature, which then speeds up your metabolism. So you can, they tested this with Tibetan monks, because the monks can sit on snow and meditate, and they melt the snow around them. And it's breathing. It's just warming up your core so much that you eventually raise your metabolism. And I saw great differences in doing that.
I've read books about Wim Hof. Same thing. Like, he's climbed Kilimanjaro wearing running shorts and boots. That was it. But and that's, you reminded me too when you talked about that breathing technique that you use to train and work on expanding your lungs. The combat breathing technique, kind of that 4x4 square. And there are apps that will help teach people that, because controlling that physiological response has great benefit to managing anxiety and stress as well.
Absolutely. And those are just some of the techniques. Hilariously, we actually use, in competition, we use a breathing technique that Air Force pilots use. So we do it the hook breath, which after your dive, in order to maintain a pressure within your lungs so that oxygen can go to your brain, we do the hook breath, which is the hold in and bear down, which was used, which pilots use against G-force.
Right.
Yeah. We have the same issue. So kind of the same issue. So to avoid a pulmonary dump where we just lose all our oxygen, we do a hook breath at the end of a dive so that we can remain conscious.
Oh, wow. So you've already talked a lot about what you do to prepare yourself and to train for the sport of freediving. Can you tell us, just the basics? And you mentioned underwater hockey. I grew up in Minnesota. We usually play hockey above the surface on the ice.
I'd never heard of it.
Yeah, neither had I. So what is freediving, and what are you trying to do when you're diving?
So I will answer that question. I will say to you, though, the reason you don't know about underwater hockey is it's not really a spectator sport.
I suppose.
Unless you have a mask on with your head in the pool, you can't really see what's happening.
Fair point.
So freediving, the basic principle of freediving is, on the surface of the water, you take a breath and you will attempt to go to a predetermined depth and swim all the way back up on one breath. So the type of freediving, and there's a lot of sort of variation within that. So I do constant weight freediving. Constant weight freediving is what you go down with, you must come up with.
Okay,
and that's the most traditional.
No ballast or anything.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's the most traditional way to free dive. So there are 4 disciplines within constant weight. It is monofin, which is the mermaid fin, bifins, which is flippers, no fins, which is breaststroke, and then free immersion, which is pulling down the line and pulling back up. So those are the 4 disciplines that I compete in. Those are the ones that you generally see. Variable weight is considered, and no limits. So no limits is you get dragged down and you get shot up. I think that's like over 200 meters, which is like 600 feet is the record. But that's really, in my opinion, that is your ability to equalize your ears. You're not expending oxygen necessarily in doing something like that, where
Right, propelling yourself downward.
exactly. So we consider constant weight freediving the most holistic way to freedive and the most challenging. So yeah, any dive takes between, at the moment for me, most of my dives take around 3 minutes to do.
Now you mentioned there's a predetermined depth, right? So you're not just, okay, I've halfway down, you're like, I feel like I can go further, but right?
No.
Okay.
So, in training, you can kind of train up to that with an open line, but in competition, you announce your depth.
Okay.
And there is a tag at that depth, and you go and fetch that tag, attach it to yourself, and you come back up. We can't risk, because now we're getting to the point where a lot of different things are happening in terms of injury in freediving. A lot of people are now starting to get decompression sickness. And when they do get decompression sickness, it is predominantly a central nervous system hit. So people are, surfacing with stroke-like symptoms, which can be pretty harrowing.
Yeah.
But, so aside from that, you can't just, there are certain rules. So you cannot announce a dive more than 3 meters deeper than your personal best. So you have to have verifiable personal bests before competition starts.
So they don't want you pushing yourself dangerously far. Is it a safety measure?
You get cowboys in the industry, and so there's given the opportunity, they'll throw out a crazy depth, and that's where our sport gets the statistic of being the second most dangerous sport in the world. Is it's either cowboys, untrained divers, solo diving, doing task loaded dives like spearfishing. So there's a very, very strict system in place. And at the same time, if someone is too deep to rescue, so most of our divers, the deepest rescue you'll get is 40 meters, where a free diver will meet you. So if someone has a problem deeper than that, you have to drop the counterballast. And at that point, because the dive is attached to the line.
Oh, okay.
So always, because if anything happens, you want to be able to pull the diver up at any point, right? So with that, you then release the counterballast, and that will pull the diver up to a depth where the safeties can reach them and bring them back up safely. So if that line is just down to infinity, it's just a time waster. So you want to be able to deploy it as quickly as possible.
So you said it's considered the second most dangerous sport.
Correct.
Second only to what?
Base jumping.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's the saying? The sky, even more so than the sea, is unforgiving of. I forget how that. Yeah.
That would make sense. Interestingly, after the pandemic, the statistics were that there was a 25% increase in depression and anxiety pretty much around the world. Not being a real fan of the water myself, and I think a lot of other people, I would imagine the amount of fear and anxiety that you have to overcome mentally, physically, in order to do your sport is just as important as the physical training.
It is. Mental training is, and it's what's interesting with my situation, and now my coach is having to learn this as well. Many people in the freediving industry are, they explain their dive. You're like, how was your dive? And they're like, oh, it was beautiful. Like, I meditated and I just felt like a raindrop in the universe, and I want to retch when I hear that because I am a naturally anxious person, high functioning anxiety. Like, it's, these things are a part of my life now. I was diagnosed with a chemical imbalance with depression at some point last year, and that's, it's chemical. So my side, mine isn't necessarily circumstantial, but with regards to overcoming fear and overcoming anxiety, for me, the most important thing is plan your dive your plan. And I have something to do every single meter of my dive. So my dive is 90 meters I have something to do every single meter, because if I don't, that gives my brain free rein to just panic. Okay, so it's taken me a really, really long time to realize that I don't fit the normal mold of a competitive freediver. These guys are incredibly mentally strong. Alexei Molchanov, he's the current world record holder. His mother, Natalia Molchanova, she came up with this method called the deconcentration method, which they were actually teaching to Russian military for a long time. And that is to turn your field of view into a 2D picture. And so that you become less responsive and less reactive to what's around you. So they use a lot of that deconcentration method. I can't use that. So I use visualization. So I do my visualization on breath hold. So I will do my dive start to finish, lying on my bed, and rehearsing every single step of it, so that I know. And that's why I've never gotten a red card for protocol. I've never had those little things happen to me, because visualization is so important for me to be successful in what I do. And it calms me down. When you understand your process and you know what the next step is, you can focus on the next step, as opposed to just stepping in there going, oh my gosh, I have to do a 90-meter dive right now. And, whereas I go, okay, I'm going to do a 4-minute breathe up at 2 minutes. I'm going to put my nose clip on and I'm going to start doing my purge cycles, and then I'm going to do my duck dive. And, you just kind of do it one step at a time. And then you panic about it afterwards.
So you've mentioned, the breathing techniques, visualization, and planning. Do you find that those skills that have made you successful in the water translate to your day-to-day life as well?
They do. Especially, for me, when it comes to planning, I like to structure my day. I like to have a checklist. So for me, because that's my reward. So what will I do with my checklist? I'll write down, the first thing that I'll write down on my checklist is something that I've already done today, and then scratch it off. Okay. And for me, it's a reward, because I become anxious when I feel like there's a lot of things to do and I haven't achieved them, but I don't know where to start. So the second I have a list, I can plan, say, okay, this, that, I'm going to do this. Once I've done that, I can do this. Yeah. And it's just that day-to-day structuring. And I know a lot of people there's a lot of pushback with structure. There's too much structure. There's too much of this. And I don't know how anyone functions on a day-to-day basis. Unless you have children, then there's no structure. That I can see from tired
no,
parents.
it becomes even more important.
Structures are very important, but it can often go sideways.
Yes.
It's execution.
Yeah. There you go.
There you go.
So, for me, I like to be able to get to the end of the day and look at my day. And if I am feeling anxious towards the end of the day, because that's normally when my anxiety hits, is when I've stopped moving for the day. Then I've got to do this tomorrow. No, I've got to phone this person and do that. And then you go, hold on, I've done these things today. I've gotten through this list. Yes, is there going to be a list every day for the rest of my life? Probably. Yeah. But it makes to compartmentalize every part of your life in terms of getting things done, I find to be incredibly useful, because otherwise 7 million things are coming at me all at once, and I just then you're on that treadmill and you can't get off it.
Right, things just keep coming, and if you let them distract you from what you've already set out to accomplish. Are you familiar with the Admiral McRaven's speech, "Make Your Bed"? Right, because it reminds me of his famous University of Texas graduation speech, where he said, "Start your day, make your bed." And then you've already accomplished something for the day. And if the rest of your day goes sideways and things don't go as planned, when you come home, you come home to a made bed.
There is nothing worse than coming home to an unmade bed.
I agree.
I don't know when. Yeah. My mother would probably be spluttering walking out the door hearing me say that, because I was an absolutely messy child. Not filthy or dirty, just messy. And I get really frustrated when the bed's not made or the dishes aren't packed away, and I don't know when that happened, but apparently I finally reached adulthood.
Yeah. Oh no, those are great lessons. Well, and so we've touched on some of the physical aspects, because that's obviously an important part of serving in the military and in world-class freediving, and then in your civilian vocation teaching kickboxing. Can you talk about the role that physical training and activity plays in kind of a holistic understanding of health? And I think you've touched on it already. And then what are some other things that you do in addition to your training specifically for freediving to stay fit and or ready for anything mentally, emotionally, even spiritually?
So fitness in general is my outlet. That is my happy place, my hobby. Some people will have other hobbies, and that's fine. I'm, there are many things that I've done. I've done a fine dining internship, so I know how to cook. I've done a yoga instructor course. I can do that. Passionate pursuit of short-term goals, especially for someone who doesn't have that lifelong dream, which I find more common in America than anywhere else. Everyone has this dream, and then once you've succeeded with that dream, what then? Passionate pursuit of short term, and the ability to be bad at something in order to become good at something.
Right.
I am so happy to be terrible at something. I've learned that, and
it's a rare quality.
You're gonna be so bad at things initially. I mean, I remember trying the rifle. I was not someone who shot anything before I went to basic training, and I remember the zeroing, and I was like, I'm just guessing here. Like, I can't. Like, this is terrible. I don't know how to do this. And
unnatural.
Completely unnatural. And all it took was eventually I just needed a drill sergeant screaming next to me to hit high marks. But I was, at no point was I like, oh, I'm terrible. Yeah, I'm terrible now. I'm gonna get better. That's how things work. The 10,000 hours, if you understand, if you want to be good at something, you need to spend a really long time doing it. And I've never had natural talent. I was not the fast kid. I was not the amazing swimmer. I was, so I was considered to be relatively average at anything. So I didn't have my parents pushing me to be athletic or anything like that. So anything I wanted to do, I had to do by myself. So what that requires is discipline. Whatever you're doing, it's so important. You feel so much better. And that's, people have forgotten what it feels like to be active. So your dopamine is coming from somewhere else, whether you're getting like a serotonin kick from looking at your phone or you're doing these other things, it's all just, it's all fake. It's all nothing, but you have a sense of reward. Yes, you're getting the serotonin or the dopamine, whatever the case is, from physical activity, but your muscles are getting better, your sleep is getting better, and you achieved something. The best thing about freediving is that when I succeed in a dive, yes, I've had coaches, yes, I've trained, yes, my boyfriend has packed my bag, fed me breakfast, and made me coffee. However, I did that dive. It was just me. And it gives you a sense of self. Sport, exercise gives you a sense of self that you get nowhere else. Because yes, I mean, every now and again, a really tricky game of Sudoku is going to test my mind, but it's, our brains are so big. They're so well connected and well wired. Our ability to understand things happens without conscious thought. Whereas when you are physically doing something that is demanding, you're 100% there. You can't go elsewhere. You can't think of anything else. You have to do this thing, and then the reward is tangible.
Right.
And once you create that relationship with sport or with exercise in general, it doesn't go away. You don't, there are people who work out for periods of time and then stop workout, and that's just not a problem, a fault on their behalf. It's a not understanding how exercise works, and that you can't just, it's going to be hard for the first 3 weeks. Right. That's what I say to my my kickboxers, is it's not only a sport, it's coordination. You're learning something new. The first 2 weeks are going to be frustrating, but if you can push through that, the results are gonna arrive, and you're gonna stick with it.
Yeah, and those adaptations take time. And you've touched on some great stuff. There's a niche within positive psychology called hope theory, and there are 3 components to kind of that hopeful outlook. So having a goal, and then understanding that I have agency over reaching that goal, and then finding a pathway to get there. Because you've described all those different pursuits, and understanding or accepting that you're not going to be able to perform at a high level right away, but what the goal is, and successes in other areas of your life have taught you that I can get there if I apply myself and stick with it and learn those adaptations.
I think one of the things in our current instant gratification culture is that we've lost the power of the yet.
100%.
Yeah.
Can't do it yet. That's always that. My dad taught me, you can't do things now, you can't do them yet. And he also told me the worst thing someone can say is no. And so that's, I'm not afraid to ask questions. I'm not like, you have to the whole idea of the unconscious incompetent to conscious incompetent to conscious competent, eventually being the unconscious competent, like that whole step, and just to, you're bad and you don't know it, you're bad and you know it, you're good if you think about it, you're good without thinking about it, that it doesn't just, for some people it does. You're gonna have proteges, you're gonna have geniuses, you're gonna have superhumans who can just do the thing, but the 99% of us, we're gonna need to do the work. So it's just about how badly you want it. And it wasn't always like, I was not always a fit person. I only, I was the average college student who partied, I was a singer, I was in a band, and then that's what I wanted to do for a while. And then one day I just woke up and I was like, I'm unhappy in my own skin. And I started with a 30-minute Jillian Michaels video. And I just did that every day for a month. And the results were amazing. And I felt great. And then I tried to go on a run with my friend. And then I realized, cool, I'm really unfit. So at some point it changes from a maintenance perspective to how far can I take this? And it's when you're there that, I think you're going to be good for life. And how far can I take it doesn't mean that you're going to push every single time, but it does mean that you're going to continuously train for improvement.
Yeah, and that's essential if you're trying to gain competence in any area of life, whether that's in the military or a sport. What's something that you've learned in the sport of freediving or in some of your other pursuits that you share with maybe aspiring soldiers or other new soldiers who are struggling to find that maybe that drive or the ability to kind of take a step forward or get over whatever obstacle is in their way?
I think as I'd said earlier, the passionate pursuit of short-term projects, most of the time we have no idea where we're going and what our future looks like. You can't, the 18 to 21-year-old that's getting into basic training or joining the military, how many of them actually have this future planned? It's their, everything is short term. So think short term with your goals. Start small. I didn't start diving And, on day one, I didn't say, okay, I'm going to go in and break all the national records. That wasn't a day one goal. The day one goal was, I want to hold my breath for 3 minutes. And I know that sounds really big here, but once you understand, most people with about an hour's worth of training can get between 3 and 4 minutes. Almost everyone.
Wow.
Humans, we've got ages to hold our breaths. Ages. But that aside, have the short-term goal, have the small goal. So with my kickboxers, I say to them, your goal is to live healthy, be there for your kids, and feel good about yourself. Those are not small goals. That's the long-term picture. So what is the first goal? And generally the first goal is a push-up. How can you do a push-up? So that's, for me, the thing that I most relate to is I looked at that ACFT test and I said, okay, my goal, currently, I'm now at work, my coworkers think I'm insane because my goal is to do 47 hand release push-ups in 2 minutes, which is 100%. And I'm not going to hit that goal unless I do a minimum of 20 hand release push-ups a day. Now, what have I done? I've compartmentalized everything and I've made it a daily achievable thing. Mm-hmm. So pick something small, pick something that you're going to be satisfied with, and pick something you can build on. It's all well and good. To my mind, a Rubik's Cube personally leads nowhere. So once I've done that, I'm not going to go on to a bigger Rubik's Cube or a 2 Rubik's Cube. I know some people, but that's personally not me. Whereas I've managed to do my 47, hand release push-ups hypothetically. Where do I go from then? Mm-hmm. Let's match the men's ACFT. Why not? That's the easiest step. That's a step that's really written there. And, you can then build on it. So small steps.
So you scored a 594. What's the one thing that you're working on to get that 600?
Push-ups.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah. Everything, I've scored full marks on everything other than push-ups. I got 47 is for my range, and the closest I got was 42.
Oh, you'll get there.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're knocking on the door.
I have a goal. Yeah. We have an ACFT, I think, in June, and we did the last one here. And my goal is 600 for that one. So I've started my run training and my push-ups training because everything else is fairly okay.
Does your breathing technique help you in the run?
No, but there's a trick to running that most people don't understand, is that it has to be a pattern. If you want to maintain if you're running, you have to run to a pattern and stick to a pattern. So I inhale for 3/4 of my run, I inhale for 2 steps and I exhale for 2 steps. And when I start going faster, I inhale for 1 step and I exhale for 3 steps.
Oh, okay.
So you have to, my pattern matches my feet because it's something that you have the pattern there and it's something that you can follow. Whereas if your feet and your breathing are moving at different times, it's going to be way harder to maintain a pattern.
Yeah. I do something very similar. I read an article probably almost 15 years ago now called Running on Air. And that was talking about how we can build imbalances, because for years I would match, I'd be even, I'd have an even number of steps for the inhale and exhale. This suggested a longer inhale and a more forceful exhale. And the patterns are odd numbered so that you're each cycle you're exhaling on a different foot so that you get balance in that, because I guess there's data too that as you exhale it puts more force on that foot. So I usually start off at like a 4 steps inhale, 3 steps exhale, then my normal is 3-2, but then if I'm really trying to pick up the cadence, it'll go 2-1.
Yeah, I'm backwards. I go 1-3.
But it works, obviously.
But that's just diaphragmatic. So I'm forcing air into my stomach by pushing my diaphragm out, and that creates a billow. It sort of creates a negative suction. When you force it out, you force your diaphragm out, you create a negative airspace in your lungs, and air just shoots down. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's fascinating. Well, so boy, this fascinating conversation. Just maybe on a little bit lighter note, I've always loved the expression that leaders are readers, and a mentor taught me something years ago. He said, "You'll start to sound like what you read." Are there any books or podcasts or anything that you're books or podcast media, things like that you're consuming that you'd recommend to people?
It is tough to recommend. I mean, the two books that I've reread this one, and that's The Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela, which is obviously a part of my heritage. And the one that I've been reading very recently that I've just finished is called Spare. And that one is done by Prince Harry.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the one, those books, I choose both of those books because from what I can see in them, is that leadership is incredibly nuanced and there isn't a straight path. And that's why I recommend those books, because it gives you the perspective from the leader, but also not the leader as we see them, the leader with the mistakes they made, the lessons they learned, how they grew up, how their environment molded them both positively and negatively. And I think that's particularly interesting with Prince Harry's book, because you see what it is like someone who is hypothetically in a position of leadership, but is considered the spare heir, and how you can turn that around and make it positive, and how he did. And he joined the military, and I think it's an incredibly interesting book. And so I would recommend personally to stay away from these high motivation, those are the superhumans. Okay. Yeah. I appreciate them, but not all of us can be David Goggins, right? So, the David Goggins and the Jocko podcasts, while I listen to both and I enjoy them both, I don't look to those places for inspiration and motivation in my life. My life is, we live in an incredibly nuanced world, and you're going to need to be able to adapt and communicate with different people in different ways, in different environments. So I think learning the art of nuance is very important.
That's absolutely essential, because everybody responds differently to different cues, and so one leadership style is not going to be effective for all people. Yeah. Beth, any other questions?
Gosh, not off the top of my head, but I'm very curious about, if I'm not overreaching, your concept of hope and what you hold on to keep you moving forward when, we haven't talked much about your struggle with cancer and overcoming, but life has definitely given you some blows. And so at those low times, what is it that you hold on to?
So when you are in the forefront of grief or loss or fear, your brain tends, I found that my brain tends to panic and go, but you haven't done anything. You haven't done enough. And it leads me to that moment of, what do I want to do? What is the thing that holds me together? And it is always freediving. And I had to learn that. I used to have a very unhealthy relationship with freediving because of how I was brought into it. I started attaching a lot of my self-worth to my dives, and that can really break you. And it did for a while. And then when my dad died, that was kind of my turning point of, I was diving competitively there, but I hadn't really, it was just a party in the week, dive on the weekend sort of situation. And when my dad died, it made me realize 3 days later, I attempted a national record 3 days after my dad died, and I had a panic attack at about 150 feet. luckily, one of the safeties who was on a scooter was there, and I asked him, get me out of here. And he grabbed me and shot me back up to the surface. And then, because I'd said to myself in that moment, my dad would want me to do this. My dad would want me to go and get these records. He'd be proud of me. And after like 2 days of just trying, I had to have a pretty hard conversation with myself and be like, my dad would never ask this of me. He would never want me to do this in the state that I'm in. And that was when I had to change my relationship with freediving and realize that, you know, sometimes a softer approach is what I need. I need to figure out how I can balance my life with that. So when I made that decision to fix the health of my relationship with my freediving, when anything hit, the overwhelming sentiment was, I'm not done yet. I'm going to hit 120 meters. And it was that pushed me forward every single time. And, you know, when it comes down to it, you know, I've said this, and I know it's terrible. I've said this to my boyfriend. I said to him, you either live this life with me or make me choose. If you make me choose, I'm not choosing you. Because this is an integral part of who I am. And it's the thing that makes me truly happy. And, you know, that does bring the contemplation of what would happen if that gets taken away from me. And that, you know, is relatable to anyone, and especially the Army, especially people getting out of the Army. What am I if I am not this thing? So, you know, the thing that brings me hope, and it ties me back to the passionate pursuit of short-term goals or projects, is I am Talya. I am not just a freediver. Freediving is something that I do. I also teach kickboxing. I also can cook food. I also go and shoot fish. I also run and I gym and I do all of these things. And if you find discipline and variety in everything, that's, you know, variety is so important. Otherwise, we just get stuck doing one or two things, and the next moment we're bored and we don't know how we got here. If something out of that little bag gets taken away, it's not the one thing that defines you. And I think, you know, when I look to hope, when I think about being hopeful, I think discipline. You can't hope for $1 million from the lottery if you haven't done the ticket, right? That's how that works. So I can't expect to be an amazing freediver if I'm not disciplined in what I do. So I can't hope for the best if I haven't put the effort in. You know, I can hope it doesn't rain tomorrow so that I can go run on the track. But if it rains, I'm going to go run on the treadmill. You know, so for me, hope, people tend to use the word hope as this, not frivolous, but sort of vague thing. And my perception of what hope should be is I can hope for a positive outcome if I have put the work in. And so for me, hope and confidence are somewhat interchangeable, because if I've put the effort in, I'm confident in my outcome. And if the outcome doesn't happen, we go back to the drawing book, and you know, that's the other thing with hope is you hoped it went well and it didn't. You know, at that point, like there's nothing constructive to work on if you just hoped without discipline. How do you fix if there was no starting ground? So, you know, if you want life to be positive, and bad things happen all the time. You know, I've had major setbacks in the last 4 years, and I don't know if it's trauma that makes independence my coping mechanism, but when any of these bad situations happened, I became a force of nature. I was like, cool, we're going to go and compete at this competition. We're going to get sponsorship over here. I'm going to get those people to give me a wetsuit, and I'm going to break 8 national records this year. That's my response to a traumatic setback or an event. For me, it's motivation. And I suppose that can be tied back into failure being as important as success, because I failed many times and it doesn't upset me anymore. Now I'm just like, cool, how do we fix it? And can move on.
Well, and your identity wasn't wrapped up in that failure or the setback or whatever it was that happened to you. And I hope it does have to be grounded in something. It can't just be a naive or simplistic optimism, a desire for something positive to happen, but grounded in something.
And you held on to controlling the things that you could control and letting go of the things that you can't and moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's I've had a few run-ins, as we say, with the cancer situation. I came to the US and, basically gone through a screening because I just knew something was wrong with my body. When you're as in touch with your body as I am, you can tell when something's wrong. Yeah. And I went in and pretty much got the result of, hey, you're going to need this procedure. And you have that like moment, and it was like the first moment in my adult life that I was like, oh, I wish my mom was here. Because you just want someone to look after you. But I had no one. I was here. I was alone. And as much as I wanted to be sad about, terrifying about what this is, at the same time, I'm here currently at that point on a tourist visa with no health insurance. I don't know how this immigration stuff works. I am not working. You've got a problem solved like you cannot believe. And, phone this person, phone that person. Well, this, hospital is doing a study. So you're going to have 30 students around while you get this done. And I'm like, yeah, that means it's free. I'm going to do it. And then by the time it came around where they were like, oh, that we think that there's a lump, we're going to need to go in and look at that. At that point, it was the 26th of December when I got that back. I had my Christmas day involved my husband drunk, passed out on the bed the whole day. And I sat on the floor eating a pizza with my cat. That was like the state of affairs. And then like wake up the next day, oh gosh, Christmas was awful. Well, guess what? There you go. And, you work. It just somehow when those things happen, I'm more motivated. I'm more motivated in the face of like an oppressive state or I push back when my back's against the wall. I'm going to put in the work extra hard, and I don't know where that comes from.
The never giving up, right? Giving up is not an option.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, never. I mean, and then, when I had the lung cancer was the worst thing in the world. Mm-hmm. I was in a bed in the corridor because the rooms were full in the emergency room. And a doctor just walked up. They wouldn't let my boyfriend in because COVID. And he just walked up to me, sat down. He said, I'm really sorry. I don't know what to tell you, but this looks like stage 5 lung cancer. Yeah. And I'm like, I just looked at him. I was like, what? And he left. And I did not see a doctor for 24 hours.
Oh my God.
They just carted me in and like just did every test they could. And, there I was a month and a half later sitting at Dean's Blue Hole in the Bahamas, just grateful to be alive. And it ended up being like one of my best competition seasons ever because I didn't care where I got to. I just cared that I was alive, and I think what that also comes down to is appreciating your body, appreciating what you have. And because I've had, I was in a wheelchair for 6 months when I was 21. I had foot reconstruction done on both my feet because I was born funny, for lack of explanation. When these things get taken away from you, I'm lucky mine were taken away temporarily. My body privileges were taken away temporarily. And so I totally understand the value in keeping this, my only vessel, as healthy as possible. And I just, if anyone is listening, don't wait for it to get to that point. Don't wait so that you can regret. Just do whatever you can to stay fit and healthy and fall in love with the process.
Yeah, and I hear a profound gratitude as well, that every day is a gift.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, do I have that thought when I woke up at 4:00 this morning for work? No, I didn't. But,
right?
But that's just getting that. But that's the moment. This is the moment today where I get to look back and I go, hey, I did get up at 4:00 this morning, and I taught my first class at 5:30, and maybe I changed the lives of someone else, and I got fit doing it, and I got paid doing it. So really, it's a win all around. It's I have a lot to be grateful for.
I can't wait for people to hear your story as well. But I got one more question. So what's next for you?
So next is interesting because it is unofficial yet, actually. That the full team hasn't been announced for Team USA. I have been told that I'm on the team, but I don't know who else is on the team. Next is crowdfunding. A year's worth of competitions takes about $20,000 to get done. So I need to, beg, borrow, and steal. But the next competitions lined up, I got South Africa next week, where I go and meet my original technique coach, and we go through, he fixes all the bad habits that I've picked up. For 3 weeks following that, I've got a depth competition in Croatia in July, a depth competition in Philippines in August, a depth competition in Corsica in September, and the World Championships in Sharm, Egypt in October.
That sounds like an exciting 2024.
It is, hopefully. Like I said, financially, I got to make that checklist. I got to start asking the right people. Yeah. But hopefully, the last 2 years have been even more tough because I've been seeking sponsorship as a South African athlete in the US. So hopefully now, under the banner of Team USA, it would be a little bit easier.
Yeah.
And any other passionate pursuits of the short term that's not freediving that you're currently?
Well, I've recently discovered that the Army has this program where they give you $4,000 a year to study. It's a Army Cool situation. I don't know. I think that was what it was called.
There's tuition assistance and credentialing assistance as well.
Exactly. Yeah, so I'm looking at doing my EMS course. My current obsession, it's kind of been sitting on me for about a year now, is to study to become a farrier.
I know a guy.
Right?
In the Guard. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I think that would just be it's random. Am I going to use it one day? I don't really care. I would just love to learn how to be a farrier and, fix the hooves of horses and cows. Yeah. And play the banjo. Those are my big three. And a muscle up is
that's my goal. Before I turn 50, I want to do a muscle up.
I want to muscle up, but dips are just the worst thing for me. I can't do them very well. So
I've gotten to ring dips, but yeah.
No. No, I can't even do a dip without a band. I struggle.
Well, you'll get there. Yeah.
Yet.
Yes, I can't do it yet. No, that's the thing. It's the goal. Yeah. I will be able to do a muscle up by the end of the year.
I love it. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, Talya. Thanks so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and I've appreciated chatting to you both. And in turn, somehow I did not expect to feel so much gratitude for being here. But thank you for your time. I appreciate you guys hearing my story and reminding me that my story is important.
It is. And I pray that it'll inspire some of our people powerful. As well.
Thank you.
This podcast is produced by the Oregon National Guard Public Affairs Office. My prayer for you is that wherever you find yourself, that you might find hope for today and strength for the ambiguity and chaos of life. Blessings on the rest of your day.